I believe all of our housekeeping orders are in place, and we're going to go ahead and begin. I just need to share our presentation. Okay. Everybody see that? Looks like we can. Something different this evening on our chat. We had a lot of questions that are coming in at the last meeting, so we've adjusted so that we can monitor and keep track of the chat questions that come in a little closer. So you'll see that those are going directly to our hosts to be able to respond. We do appreciate all questions being posted in the chat. We like to keep the documentation of the feedback from our community as well as the interaction as part of this meeting. So please do post any questions there, and we'll pause or make time to make sure we respond to any questions that come up. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and start with this evening's presentation. We are looking at our first goal in our LCAP. We have 4 goals as part of our LCAP and our district goals. Goal 1 is around the idea of students being college and career ready via high quality instruction of state standards. These are measured by state, federal, and district assessment tools, including the California dashboard with success as indicated in the metrics, which defines targets for each metric. That's a lot of what we're going to discuss tonight is the metrics for our instructional goals, how we're making progress towards what we said we hope to achieve. Just a reminder, this is a 3-year plan. And so we are in the first year of the 3 years. So all of our metrics are really looking at, are we making progress to reach our goals by year 3? So we have the remainder of this year and 2 more years to hit what we've determined as our metrics. So I'm going to dive right into our goal 1 metrics and get started with that. This is a summary of all of our metrics to date. Some of our metrics are not yet reported. We have to wait till the end of the school year for those metrics to come in. But these are the ones we can currently report out on. And we are on track for 22 of our instructional service metrics. There's 15 that we are not on track in year 1. And then there's 7 still to be determined. Overall, you can see with all of our goals, we are on track in 37 of those metrics. 19 of those are off track and 8 yet to be determined. Majority of our metrics are goal 1 instructional metrics. So the first slide here of our metrics, we start with English learners. And a lot of the metrics that we look at are based on our CASP assessments. These are the state assessments, also known as SBAC. Students take English, language arts, and math in the spring in grades 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then again in high school in grade 11. And you can see we look at specific subgroups as part of the LCAP to determine whether or not we are making progress towards those goals. The majority of our metrics when it comes to the CASP assessment are set to increase the percentage of students that are proficient by 3% over 3 years. So we're looking for a 1% increase each year until the end of the 3-year plan. You can see our English learners are on track as they are increasing the percent proficient. Whereas some of our other subgroups, we saw a decline from our 2022-2023 baseline. Foster youth is a student group that we are required to monitor, but we don't have enough foster students in Burbank Unified to receive data because of how small of a population we have here. Continuing on with the next slide, we're looking at a couple other subgroups, including Hispanic, our GATE students who are what we like to refer to as twice exceptional, meaning they are identified as GATE, but have other designations such as English learner or low socioeconomic status. We also are looking at English learners for math. So some of the previous scores were English language arts, and you can see those different subgroups on this slide. Meeting in two areas and seeing a decline from our baseline in 3 on this slide. We're again looking at foster youth. This is the math side of the house. I still don't have a large enough subgroup to report out on, but you can see with students with disabilities, Hispanic, and our GATE students in math, we are on the right track with growth in the percentage of students scoring proficient. The last item on this one is all students on English language arts. And you can see overall, which is one of our key metrics, this includes all students, we saw a decline of about 2% from the 2022-2023 school year. We've looked at that data. It's something that we've been talking with principals about and just determining how best to support students, especially students in 3rd, 4th, 5th, as they received their first couple of years of education and distance learning, and making sure they have not only all of the grade level skills necessary for the assessment, but also the prerequisite skills from prior grade levels. This next slide starts with all students, and this is looking specifically at math. Another key metric in our LCAP, all students scoring proficient on the math assessment. Here we dropped by about 1% from the previous school year. So again, all of our metrics for the most part have a baseline of the 2022-2023 school year. We're looking to increase from that baseline by the end of the 3-year plan. We get to some more specific metrics here, looking at our English learners making progress towards English language proficiency. This is a California dashboard indicator, and you can see we've increased by 2% the percentage of students that are making progress. This is an important metric for us as we invested a lot of funds in LCAP to obtain this goal. Last year, if you were part of our LCAP process, when we created our 3-year plan, there was a lot of discussion about supporting our English learners, as we've seen an increase in that population in the last 2-3 years. We've also seen a significant number of students that are new to the country. So first generation families and immigrants that need even more support with getting familiar and being able to be successful and navigate U.S. schools. So a very key metric, and we're really happy to report making progress on that one. The next one is the percentage of English learners being reclassified. This is an interesting metric. We do have to hand calculate this, and the population changes. So as we reclassify students, we're always looking at the students of gaining new English learners while we reclassify students out. So sometimes it's hard to maintain that percentage. But we did see a decrease there from 20% to about 13%. And we'll continue to monitor that, but that fluctuates. Sometimes we see large cohorts of students reclassify one year, and then we don't have as many reclassify the following year. Next is percent of fully credentialed teachers. This is becoming even more intricate and sophisticated each year. So previously this was self-reported data, and it was looking at primary assignments for teachers. That's still true at elementary, whereas in secondary, the data has gotten more specific to look at every single period that a teacher teaches and making sure they are appropriately credentialed in all of those areas. This gets very detailed with some of the courses that we want and try to offer to our students at secondary, such as CTE courses, dance, and other courses that are very specific. So you can see the
What's
data
that
there.
timer for, Mama?
You can see the data there, and this is a work in progress for us as we continue to monitor our data and make sure that we're reporting as accurately as possible. Graduation rate is a big positive for Burbank Unified. So we're going to kick off the end of this slide and in the next slide really with a 96.3 graduation rate. That's up from 93.2 the previous year. That's an outstanding graduation rate. There's very few districts in California and LA County that have a graduation rate as high as that. So a real testament to our high school counselors and all of our teams really preparing our students for graduation. You can see this next slide, a lot of positive going on with our graduation rate as we look at all of our subgroups. Areas of interest for us that we will continue to investigate is our homeless population. Again, there's a very transient population, so that the students that are included in that group change year to year. And sometimes we're inheriting students in their senior year, and we're trying to help them as best we can to cross that finish line. But very, very specific group for us to continue to work with and monitor. Students with disabilities stayed consistent from the previous year. Also a group that we hope to see increases as they are below our general population with 88.3%. There's also been some new legislation around the requirements for special ed students that we can take advantage of to support our students in getting that diploma. DNF rate is still to be determined. We've done a lot of work with some of our action items to support teachers in collaboration and PLCs to decrease our DNF rates specifically in math and English. So we hope to have good data to share at the conclusion of the school year. And dropout rate is the last item here that we've seen a decrease in our dropout rate from 1.4 to 1%, which is again a very outstanding statistic for a Southern California school district. Next slide, we're looking at the early assessment program. This is a repeat of the CASP assessment, but this is specific to 11th grade students. So it's just looking at our 11th graders and if they're prepared for university. They use the CASP SBAC assessment to determine their preparedness. Just sort of we take this data with a grain of salt as the assessment has been more challenging each year to incentivize for our 11th grade students. There's not much accountability for them to do their best and really show their performance. It used to be an option to be able to be tested out of rudimentary English or math classes at community colleges. That's no longer the case. So we're continuing to work on methods to motivate our students to perform their best on those assessments. A through G rate. This is one that we hoped to see increase, and if you look, we're set a high bar for us with a 2% increase each year. So we're looking to increase by about 6% over the course of the 3-year plan. We took a step back this last year by a very small percentage, but we really do anticipate this increasing. There's some data, some technical pieces that we can look at to make sure we're accounting for all students who meet the A through G rate and get credit for every student that should. And then we've also been doing work with our math teachers, not only in high school, but middle school to increase that rate. So we have high expectations for our A through G rate in the near future. The next one is our credit recovery, AP, advanced placement, pass rate, expulsions, and then the last one is our Williams Act instructional materials requirement. All of those we're meeting, and you can see that percentages have increased from last year in all of those metrics. And again, very proud of the fact that we have not expelled any students from our district. Moving on to the next slide, we get into some unique data points or metrics for us. This is participation in our DLAC, LCAP advisory group, and PTA council meetings. So this is part of not only our LCAP, but our governance to make sure we meet all the requirements for participants in those committees. We'll also look at district assessments. That data has yet to come in, so we will report out on that at the conclusion when we finalize our plan. We're also looking at students to be college and career ready. A through G contributes to that, as well as other metrics such as CTE completion, dual enrollment with a college or university for dual credit, and our CASP scores as well. So we will be, again, an item for us wanting to monitor an increase. We saw a slight increase, but we would like to see more in the near future. Broad course, there's a couple, that's a local indicator that we report to the state dashboard that was met. And in that we meet a broad course of offerings and allow open access to our students to enroll in our course offerings, specifically at high school. The last one is a 4-year adjusted cohort graduation rate. This is a unique calculation done by the state that looks at students over the course of the 4 years at our high school, whether they started with us or left our school district, and whether they were able to complete high school. So this encompasses not just our senior graduating class, but the whole cohort of students that were enrolled throughout that 4-year graduating group. Last slide, when it comes to our metrics, is looking at the students who meet the CAST. This is a new metric for our LCAP. If you're not familiar, CAST is the science assessment. And this is the first year that we've had not only a baseline to compare to, but the reporting on the California dashboard. So we took a percentage drop. This assessment is only given in 5th, 8th, and 11th. And previous to this has had very little accountability attached to it. But there's a lot of discussion in our elementary, middle, and high school about supporting students to be prepared for this. We've purchased recently new science curriculum at the elementary, and we are working with some of the interim assessments to prepare our students for this assessment when the time comes to take it. Last two here is expulsions, and then another local indicator as far as meeting all of the local standards. So there's about 5 or 6 local indicators that we report, and we met all of those. So overall, just in reflection, going back to where we started, in our goal 1, we have 22 metrics that are on track, 15 that are not, and 7 yet to be determined. Most of the ones that we are going to look at closely and see how we can increase either our services or support students are around the English language arts and math CASP scores, and continuing to improve those. We do have a question on how do parents get involved in the LCAP advisory group? You're involved by attending this meeting. So this is our advisory group, and we use the feedback, the questions, the dialogue that occurs. we encourage anyone that's participating to email myself, Dr. Paramo, especially Dr. Macias, with tonight's topic of instructional services. If you have questions or feedback about some of the programs and services that we offer. So with that, I'm going to move forward to our action items. This is a list of the items that we fund with our LCAP dollars. Just a quick overview of our LCAP budget for this year's LCAP at first interim, which is our first update with our budget. You can see where our spending is in our three primary goals. So our goal one, instructional services, that's what we're discussing tonight, is the vast majority of our LCAP budget. We also spend money for educational services. That'll be our next meeting in February. Educational services is think about the whole child. So we're looking at counseling, everything that a child may need to be successful outside of instruction and classroom per se. Personnel services, this is a lot of our diversity, equity, and inclusion work, but it's the specific goal for goal three is maintaining and hiring high quality teachers. And then goal four is not listed here because we don't have any budgeted items for goal four, but that's maintaining our infrastructure and campuses. So you can see we're very close to where we budgeted at first interim as far as the dollar amounts that we're spending. Our carryover from last year to this year, and you're going to see that we have a much less carryover going into next year. We'll talk about that at the end of the meeting, but I want to get started with just an opportunity for Dr. Macias to talk through the next two slides and some of the ways we support our instructional programs.
Thank you, Dr. Anders. And before I actually start presenting and sharing information, I do want to acknowledge a couple of district officials here in the room with us. Dr. Knappich, thank you, and Ms. Rebecca Harris, our Director of Elementary Education. And also want to huge shout out to Dr. Anders and getting this all together and facilitating this conversation. This is not an easy process. It's a very comprehensive approach that needs to be collaborative, and he's done an amazing job. I want to mention that because for our community at home and those who will view this later, I want to make sure that everyone understands that this LCAP has been intentionally designed to ensure that all our Burbank Unified students, regardless of background, have the opportunity to reach their full potential by addressing the specific areas of need that we have identified. And we've already covered that for instructional services with the metrics that have been shared, the areas that we are hitting, and the areas that we need to grow upon as well. And there are lofty goals indeed, but goals that we deem necessary for our Burbank Unified students. Now, in terms of the specific Goal 1 action items, a reminder that our Goal 1 is focused on getting our kids college and career ready, as defined by all the metrics that have been shared with you tonight already. So all our actions are the detailed approach to covering programs, professional development for teachers, and overall support services for our specific student groups. On our first slide that you see here on Goal 1 action items, you'll see items. And again, we are reporting out what was originally budgeted and where we are at with our first interim report. I'm going to highlight a couple of areas. We did talk about language learner metrics. There is a significant amount of money being put at every grade span level to provide those academic supports. You'll see that at the elementary level and at our secondary, which encompasses our middle schools and high schools. I want to go back what was shared earlier by Dr. Anders, with the majority of our funding being geared towards Goal 1, it's actually very significant. It does reflect a very laser-focused approach by our district into our instructional focus. So roughly about 75% of our LCAP budget. So I want to make sure to highlight that. And then going back to our slide with ELD supports and also providing elementary response intervention for reading, language, arts, and math. We have budgeted for middle school psychologist and behavior specialist. Next slide, you will continue to see overall support academically for instructional services being budgeted in line item out for actions for our English learner program, the full-time curriculum specialist, library coordinators, what was mentioned before in our GATE twice exceptional population. There's funding support there. Sheltered sections at the secondary level for our language learner students. And then also, I want to highlight RTI assessment programs, which come in the form of iReady assessment and School City. Again, those two specific slides cover the exact details of approach and how we are covering the instructional focus and the metrics that we are being measured by ourselves for the specific student groups that we are focusing in on.
Gonna take a moment just to pause if there's any questions about any of the items that we fund in our goal 1 actions. Please do post any to the chat addressed to our hosts and co-hosts, and we can respond directly.
Or if others come to mind, Oscar Macias at burbankusd.org. Feel free to email me directly.
So budget planning, we've addressed this in some previous meetings. So just to want to share or recalibrate with our process for our LCAP adoption. We've had two meetings previously, one in November, which was our initial budget update, looking at our budget for this year in anticipation of revenues and what we anticipated carry over for next year. In January, we had a conversation about the budget planning for next school year. In that, determining some items that we could reduce funding or remove from LCAP, as well as opportunities to reallocate some funds to better serve our current needs with students. Those items, as far as the budget planning, will be taken to the school board on February 20th. That meeting is an opportunity for our board members to hear some of the discussion and planning that we have around next year's budget. It's also opportunity for feedback from our community as well. We encourage feedback at that meeting so that our board can hear directly from our parents and community about some of the proposed budget items that we're looking at for next year's plan. With that said, just a little background and why we're sharing the next couple slides. In that our funding for the plan, our LCAP plan, is comprised from this population of students. And so we also need to spend the funding that we receive in LCAP to support this population of students. These are called unduplicated students in that they count once in our total, but they may be counted in multiple categories as far as being identified maybe as an example, as a free and reduced meal program participant, but also an English learner, for example. So what you'll see is the far right column of our total may not add up across the row, and that's because they may meet multiple categories. What you can see is we've maintained our numbers from last year, which is a good thing. It means funding as far as revenues is stable, and we saw a slight increase the year before. This is still, we're tempering our expectations with revenues for next year because we are seeing declining enrollment across the district, as well as other districts in our area and the entire state of California. So we hope that we can continue to encourage families to complete the free and reduced meal application, as that's one of the qualifiers to receive this funding. And to be specific, it is approximately $2,000 over the course of the year for every student that does qualify. And so that's how we accumulate this pot of money to provide these services. So we've done a lot of campaigning and promotion around getting the word out for students and families to complete the free and meal reduced application, even though they already receive free meals through that federal program. That is one of the determining factors that we can encourage families to self-report. So with that in mind, a overview of where we are with our budget going into next year and why we've had a budget conversation in January, and we'll have a follow-up conversation with the school board on February 20th. As you can see that our carryover dollars have been spent down. That's the primary driver on why we're having to reduce our budget. Why did we have carryover to begin with? These were monies that were put in reserve during the pandemic and distance learning. We received other federal and state funds such as ESSER and the Learning Recovery Block Grant, as well as others. That allowed us to spend those one-time dollars first and save the funding that we received from supplemental for this plan as a reserve. We've spent that down over the last couple of years, and you can see that dollar amount decreasing by about $1 million each year, to where if we were to not make any changes to our plan next year, we would run an excess of about $500,000 in spending. So we're looking to reduce spending by approximately $500,000. That was the information shared in November. And then in January is sharing where we are in that discussion of not only what do we need to cut to remain solvent with our revenues and our budget, but also what are the needs at our schools and how do we best support the population that brings in these funds. So that is the primary concern that will be brought to the school board next week, right? I believe it's next week, Thursday. Subsequently, we will meet the following week after that, in 2 weeks from today, to talk about goal 2, which is our educational services goal. We can talk about the metrics, how we're providing those services and those action items specifically, and measuring our progress towards our LCAP goals when it comes to that. We'll also spend some time talking about goal 3, which is our personnel goal and our DEI work at that meeting as well. Subsequently, our last LCAP meeting for our PAC, our community, to engage and discuss will be in March. We will have a meeting in March where we will share what we intend to propose as next year's budget. So everything to this point has been discussion, feedback, input, and awareness. Our 2 primary meetings that we really want feedback from our community is on that February 20th board meeting when we do our mid-year update, as well as our March LCAP meeting where we will be proposing what we anticipate. Having said that, this is a process. It's intentional. Nothing is finalized, and the LCAP will not be adopted until June. So we have a long runway to prepare next year's plan and continue to have a dialogue with our community. With that said, that is our last slide for this evening, but we would love to entertain any goal or any questions or address any concerns when it comes to our instructional goals and metrics and action items. And I'm happy to go back to any previous slides for reference. While I do that, I'm going to post in the chat the link to our webpage that has tonight's slides. We'll also be posting a recording of tonight's meeting, and you can also see the recording and slides from the previous LCAP meetings this school year. So I see we have a couple of questions that came directly to me. Please change shelter to integrated shelter. There's not really used anymore. Thank you. We can make sure we're using appropriate nomenclature. Can you share how BUSD's student population decline and budget impacts compares to a peer district, for example, Glendale USD or Pasadena? And that was from one of our participants. I can share in that what we're experiencing is similar across other districts. We've actually been very fortunate as a district to have about a 10% population district-wide of permit students. So we do attract a lot of students to our district that don't reside within our boundaries. And that's a very good thing for us as it helps offset the enrollment decline that's within our boundaries. Additionally, the English learner population that has increased over the last couple of years is helping with our enrollment as well as we attract families from other countries to come to Burbank and receive support, not only as a student in our schools, but also to acquire English language. So those two populations specifically have helped Burbank maintain enrollment for the most part. Having said that, we've worked with demographers and consultants to project what enrollment can and could look like the next couple of years. And that those projections are to see a decline. California in general is seeing a decline in birth rates. And a community like ours is not immune to that. The most significant factor that we see currently is that we're graduating class sizes that are about 100 to 200 students more than the kindergarten classes that are enrolling. So just that alone is reducing our overall enrollment each year when we're not backfilling with new cohorts of students coming in kinder. It's not that students are leaving the district to go elsewhere. We do experience students that do move out of state or do relocate, but typically that's a net zero with the amount of students that move in or come into the district from other school districts as well. We did have a question about if this is the right place to discuss the proposed cuts for intervention specialists. Tonight's meeting isn't the best venue for that. We really want that feedback to take place with our school board to be present so they can hear. We will discuss intervention specialists at our next meeting when we talk about goal 2, as there are metrics that we have that measure our progress towards meeting that goal, as well as it is one of the action items within that. I know that there's a lot of feedback that the community wants to give us about that item. So we really appreciate that. We just want to make sure that voices are heard most appropriately, and so that they can honor that feedback as best we can. You can also email Dr. Peter Knappik about that, as it's specific to elementary, or Miss Rebecca Harris, as well as myself or Dr. Parama. We're happy to receive anything specific when it comes to that. It's also something that we've been working with our union partners and hope to provide additional information at next week's board meeting. We just need to follow a process so that we can make sure that the timing is appropriate to share any new updates or information with the community at the appropriate time. So I do appreciate you asking that question, and we're looking forward to being able to have a discussion about that for next year's budget. How is Prop 28 helping to offset expenditures for the arts? Interesting question. As there was articles that just hit today about LAUSD and the Prop 28 funding. So one of the things that's specific in Prop 28 is that we cannot use that to supplant existing programs, only to be additional services or additional programs. So that's one of the challenges with Prop 28. and that districts like us are in financial crisis, and so to speak. But we can't use those Prop 28 funds to sort of backfill or help us keep afloat with our budgetary needs. Those have to be invested specifically into the arts and to create additional jobs or programs in addition to the ones we've already been funding. Great question. And then another direct message to me was to post to the chat who we may reach out to regarding the intervention specialists. So I will make sure that you have those emails in the chat. That does look like all the questions currently, so I'm going to respond to that in the chat. But if you do have any others, please reach out through the chat. Any final remarks from you, Dr. Macias?
And no, just a thank you to our Burbank Unified community. Always feel free to reach out and share your concerns or ideas or other collaborative things. We're all ears and open to having those discussions. So again, thank you very much.
We have another question. I believe LCAP relates specifically to certain groups, but are there metrics on how English only speakers are doing to see if that changes the percentage of kids who are at level? So those were some of the metrics that we looked at this evening, our reclassification rate being one of those, but also their performance on both the English language arts CASP assessment as well as the math CASP assessment. We also look at their graduation rate. So there's a handful of metrics that we use to monitor, are we providing appropriate services, or are we providing really increased services for that population? I would happy to provide more specifics. I put my email in the chat if you'd like more specifics on that population.
Robin, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I'd like to take a moment to address that as well. We had responses from the community probably around November and concerned about...
I'm going to stop just for a second to acknowledge that this is Dr. Paramo, their superintendent, in case you weren't aware.
Thank you, Robin. We had parents concerned because they saw a drop in performance data. So I think that's totally fair. And I want to address that for a minute. And it correlates to the question that you were answering in the chat. So if you look at performance data for English, math, and science, you will see that this year we decreased. Our scores came down. I don't believe that it's statistically significant. In some cases, it was 1%. In other cases, it was 2%. What I want to point out is that the decrease correlates very closely to the amount of new immigrant students that we received into. So this is not a bad thing. And what I can use as evidence of that is if you look at the scores for our English only kids, they didn't drop at all. So if you isolate the scores for English only, there was no drop. So the fact that we went down 1 or 2% for me is not a huge concern, because I embrace the fact that we have kids from other countries that have come to Burbank and chosen Burbank and want to be in Burbank. The unintended consequence is that it'll probably take us a year or two before that population is scoring in the proficient range. But I accept that challenge willingly, and with all the services we're providing, I believe that they will be caught up sooner rather than later. So I think that is important to say, because we're all very mindful of the performance for our students, because we want the best for them.
Thank you, Dr. Paramo. I don't see any other questions in the chat, but again, the emails have been posted there for you to reach out to us. I have one other email. I want to make sure that I include Dr. Macias's email. I know the question was about intervention specialists, but again, anything related to our instructional services programs he's the best person to contact to get you an answer. I thank everyone for your participation. Again, check our website for the LCAP for our upcoming meetings and look forward to any feedback we receive at tomorrow or next week's meeting at the school board. Appreciate everyone. Stay safe, stay dry tomorrow, and have a good rest and a 3-day weekend. Look at that. Enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you.